Actually, I believe
Anybody
she
can share.
has arranged it so that anyone can share. So hopefully, Rabbi Goldberg, that means you shouldn't have a problem with sharing.
Okay, very good. And someone then will manage just in terms of muting people and the rest.
Okay, others can mute. Rabbi Yasker, would you like to do a little introduction to Rabbi Goldberg?
It would be my honor. A special welcome to Rabbi Goldberg once again. Thanks for joining us. Bruchim habayim to everybody. It's nice to see people, even those of you who have snow in the background. It's good to see everybody here. Very nice turnout. Just credit to our chair. But in this week's parsha, very emotional, to some degree tense if you don't know the story beforehand. Yosef ultimately reveals his true identity to his brothers. That's a little bit shocking for the brothers. Yosef takes a few different steps to convince them who he really is and to break the ice with them. There's some other things that take place. And then there is a set of directions about getting home, getting the word to Yaakov, their father, and coming back down to Egypt to be sustained in Mitzrayim, in Egypt. One of the specific commands, directives that Yosef gives to his brothers is in the following pasuk. It's the first part of the pasuk. I'm going to read the whole pasuk. V'igadatem la'avi et kol kvodi b'Mitzrayim, and you shall tell my father all of my, I'm not going to translate this word, kvodi, from kabod, in Egypt, v'eit kol asher item, and everything that you have seen, umihartem oradatem et avi hena, and you shall, act quickly, and you should bring my father here. So, what does kvodi mean? You're all muted. Normally, I'm sure that most of us are going to say, we wouldn't be wrong. Normally, that would be my honor. I mean, obviously, Yosef's number 2 in Egypt. He's the viceroy. He has a lot of honor. It would be very natural to translate that word as honor. But we know that the shoresh, kafvet dalid, could also be kaved. What kaved, which is something that's heavy. And indeed, Rabbi Baruch Mezhibuz, who was a grandson of the Baal Shem Tov, said that was Yosef's intention. That Yosef was telling the brothers, please tell my father about my heavy load of obligations here, running this country and providing food for many others. And to let my father know that I do it all while introducing recognition of Hashem, into my life and as much spirituality into my environment as I can do. I think that Reb Baruch, maybe for that comment, is relying on the phrase, "Ve'eit kol asher itim," everything that you've seen, because the brothers were witness to how Yosef conducted himself. So a different twist on this pasuk, and I use that twist to acknowledge Rabbi Goldberg and your busy schedule, and thank you for making room to join and share Torah with us today.
Thank you for that introduction. Rabbi Yasker, deeply appreciated. I don't know where that dinging is coming from, if it's on my end or is anyone else hearing dinging or just me?
Just checking.
I hear dinging.
So maybe whoever's in charge, if you mute all.
That's more people
It's people
joining
entering.
into the session. Oh.
Okay, but if you mute all other than me, I'm more than happy to hear that. Maybe it'll be an alarm that wakes up those who fall asleep. So maybe leave it on. Okay. There you go. Good thing someone's at the door. Okay, let me show you my screen. You see source sheets right now that say Nittel Nacht?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, good. That means that this is working then.
Source sheets are up, and I may have been able to eliminate the ring.
Nuts.
Okay. Hold on. I'm just making sure I can see your comments. If you'll have any in the chat.
Not
Feel free to
learning.
put in the chat. Okay, if everyone can mute themselves, that'll be a great way for us to begin. Okay, first of all, thank you so much for that introduction. It's wonderful to be together with everybody. Unfortunately, not in person, as we look forward to each and every year, but at least virtually, the gift of technology. And I hope that everyone is safe and healthy and doing well. I want to examine a topic which is coming up, as in tonight, and relevant to all of us, however you come out on the topic and whichever conclusion you draw. And that is the question of Nittel Nacht, the Jewish observance of the eve of December 25th. Well, you'll say to me, what kind of Jewish observance? You're going to hang up? You're going to leave the Zoom right away? What kind of rabbi is this? What kind of Jewish observance is this? So you may have heard of the topic of Nittel Nacht, the eve of December 25th, and its implications for us. Are there Jewish practices? Are there behaviors? Are there patterns or routines that we have? This is a comprehensive topic, and we don't have time to analyze it, and I'm not adequate to analyze it in a comprehensive way. Scholars have. It's a wonderful article by Mark Shapiro called Torah Study on Christmas Eve in the Journal of Jewish Thought and Philosophy from 1999. It's well worth reading that article. Very, very comprehensive. And other studies that really tackle this topic. But as today is Thursday, December 24th, I thought that it was a worthwhile topic for us to look at and to see the origins, the source, and the implications for us. So you can either simply listen, or the source sheets that I have are online if you want to follow. So first of all, it's interesting, this custom, the greatest association people have with Nittel Nacht, with the eve of December 25th, is a custom of not learning Torah, to not learn Torah tonight. Now, some are very strict, and they don't learn Torah the whole year. It's a special chumrah. I'm just joking. It's not even a joke. Chas v'shalom, we have to learn Torah the whole year. That is the source of our sustenance, of our nourishment, of our very lives. So in fact, if Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam, if studying Torah is equal and opposite to all other Torah and mitzvos, if it is the very life source that sustains us, how could it possibly be part of our tradition, of our Masorah, to take off a night? That there's an evening that supposedly, or certain segments of the Jewish community believe that not only are you exempt from studying Torah tonight, but that in fact you're forbidden, that it's inappropriate, that it's incorrect to study Torah tonight. That flies in the face of the primacy and of the supreme and central value that Torah learning has. So where does it come from? Where does this custom come from? Where does it trace itself? It's interesting. The custom of Nittel Nacht does not appear in the Gemara, the Talmud, does not appear in the Medrash, any rabbinic literature. It's not codified or quoted in the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law of Rav Yosef Karo. So where does it come from? If you look here in source number 1, Sefer Tamei HaMinhagim. Here in Tamei HaMinhagim, it quotes, forget the date right now because there are different traditions exactly when this custom is applied. He references this custom, the Tamei HaMinhagim, and he gives one suggestion of its origin, is that Christmas Eve, traditionally, historically, non-Jews Christians would often get drunk, rabble-rousers would be out and about, and if they find a Jew on the night that celebrated their God, whom they saw as a victim of our people, they would take out vengeance, they would take out their anger and their rage against the Jewish people. They even thought it was a crusade. They give it a name. They called it a mitzvah. He quotes in Likutei Apardes. Exactly what the origin of this theory is questionable. But the first theory about where this custom derives from is not based on any law. It's not based on any religious value. It's not based on any Kabbalistic value. It's based on a pragmatic, practical value. That if a Jew were out and about on the eve of Christmas, when Christians were going to Mass, and some were inebriated, intoxicated, either on the way there or on the way out, that if they would discover and encounter a Jew, that Jew's life lay in the balance. And therefore, they said the Beis Medrash is closed, the shul is closed, the Svarim are closed, there is no learning that night, stay home, stay safe. Staying safe is of primary value. Now, we'll come back to this. There's a question on that theory, which is, why not learn at home? And the simple solution is because when this was first ordained, the custom was first put into place in practice, people didn't have access to Svarim at home. They didn't have Safaria or apps or Google or Zoom. They couldn't zoom into a shiur. There was a time when you were denied, when you had to distance, that meant distancing from Torah learning too. Only the shul of the Beis Medrash had the works that you could open to be able to study. But what I want to draw your attention to is the early reference to Nittel that goes back. Now, can we, before we continue, when we talk about this topic, are we allowed to use the name Jesus? Can you say the name Jesus? Are you allowed to say the name Christmas? Or does it include a word which, of course, we utterly and categorically reject? So Sefer Chassidim here in source number 2, Sefer Chassidim is strict. The Sefer Chassidim says, "V'shem Elohim acharim lo saskiru liyishma apicha v'samach l'shalosh regol and tachel g'bashana." He says you're not allowed to. The name of another god has to be foreign. You have to have an allergic reaction. You have to recoil. You're not allowed to utter even the name of a foreign god. And if you skip to the underline, he writes, "Afilu shem edam shakora Michael lo yizkor Yisrael." Even the name Michaelmas, another reference or synonym for what we call the December 25th, even that name you shouldn't mention. Shem Edom, their idolatrous religion, which references the birth of an idolatrous god, a deity, which we know is false and that's not real. Even the name, not only the actual name, but even a synonym of that name, Michaelmas, you should not mention that name either. However, we do find that early commentaries, Rishonim, have no hesitation and no problem mentioning Jesus by name. Jesus, in fact, was his name. This is an uncensored edition of the Rambam in Hilchos Malachim, source number 3. Here, the Rambam in Hilchos Malachim, which is in Shoftim, the Shoftim volume of the Yad HaChazaka, Perek Yadav, the 11th chapter, Halacha Daled. And the Rambam writes the following: Im Yamod Melech mi Beis David Hoge B'Torah V'Osek B'Mitzvos K'David Aviv K'vi Torah Shebachsav Shebapeh V'Yachov Kol Yisrael Lilech V'Lechazek Bidka V'Yilachim Machamas Hashem. If there arises a king who studies Torah and occupies himself with mitzvos, as did his ancestor, because of course to qualify as Mashiach, you have to descend from the Davidic dynasty, the Davidic monarch, and so on. And he will prepare this individual will be a charismatic, transformational individual, and they will inspire the whole world to serve God together in a unified way. That is authentic. And then the Rambam deviates, and he writes, and again, the Rambam, the early editions of the Rambam, manuscripts of the Rambam, were censored by medieval censors for fear that if we included these references to Jesus, to Christianity, there would be a terrible backlash against the Jewish people. So early editions of the Rambam were censored, and yet this is one of the fully uncensored editions, where he writes, "Af sheyeshu hanotri shedima sheyeh Mashiach v'nerag bebezdin." Jesus, the Jesus of Nazareth, who thought that he was the Messiah and was killed, put together by a Bezdin Kfarnas Nabi Bo Daniel. This was already prophesied. This was already anticipated. And the Rambam writes, all these matters related to Jesus of Nazareth and of Muhammad, the Ishmaelite who came after him, only served to clear the way for Mashiach, to prepare the whole world to worship Hashem with one accord. And here the Rambam, who paskins, by the way, halacha l'maisa, not a topic for today, but the Rambam who holds that Islam is not idolatry halachically, but Christianity is idolatry halachically. But the Rambam here seems to say not anything praiseworthy about either Jesus or Muhammad, but that the two of them at least worship the same God that we do, although they perverted and distorted and deviated Islam in a way that doesn't make it categorized as idolatry. Christianity for the Rambam is idolatry. But he said they cleared the way for Mashiach to prepare the whole world to worship God with one accord. But nevertheless, I bring it to your attention to show you that the Rambam, the uncensored version, has no hesitation to use the name Yeshua. Why? Because that was his name. Jesus was a Jew. When he got called to the Torah, he got called by his name. And therefore, we too, when we use the name Jesus, Yeshua, we're using his name, his second name, or what they've given him as his second name, which means God, that we don't use. Of course, that is a description that we would never apply, but the name itself, there's nothing wrong with. The Agos Maimonios also in Hilchos Avodah Zarah, Perkei Halacha Yud, is commenting, and the Agos Maimonios writes, Uvekama Mekomos, I'm in source number 4, Uvekama Mekomos Betalmud, Huskuru Yeshu Anotzer Betalmidov, Ve'ein Eloha Goyim Yoser Mimenu. And in many places, several places in the Talmud, there's a reference to Jesus of Nazareth, Yosha HaNotzri, and his disciples, and there's no Goyish God, that's an exact translation, there is no non-Jewish idolatrous God greater than he, and yet you see that Gos My Money has no problem using his name, the Vilna Gaon as well, the Kama Makamo Suskar Osaish V'Tamid of B'Shas, and then his name is used several times in Shas, and therefore there is no hesitation. And similarly, when it comes to using the title Christmas, some suggest it's prohibited, because of course it includes, the first part of that word includes the word God, a title that we're unwilling, because it's wrong, to give. However, there are contemporary poskim who, the Divrei Chachamim, the Olas Yitzchak, and others, including Rav Yehuda Herzl Henkin, who was nifter just last night. Rav Henkin, who is the author of the Tshuvas B'nai Banim. Rav Henkin, the grandson of the great Rav Henkin, who was the posek in America. Rav Henkin, who just passed away in Yerushalayim last night, Neshama should have an aliyah, also has an article called Haskara Shem Avodah Zarah Bizman Hazeh, and he justifies or says it's permissible to use the term Christmas because we're not using it in a religious context. We're using it to describe a date. Of course, it can be avoided. One could avoid it, but technically speaking, there'd be nothing wrong with using it. So what we've established so far is there's nothing wrong with using Jesus' name. One should avoid using the name of the religion, but technically there are many who say it is permissible to use because we're referring to a date on the calendar. We're not referring to any description of being God. So where does this notion of Nittel come from? Where does the notion of Nittel Nacht or of Nittel come from? So in rabbinic literature, it's called Nittel. Going back to medieval times, it's referenced here, the Trumas Hadeshin, source number 7. Trumas Hadeshin, Yisrael Isserlin, who is among the Rishonim, goes back to medieval times. And the Trumas Hadeshin, in Shua Kuf Tzadihei, which, by the way, also, if you look at most editions of the Trumas Hadeshin, you will not find this shaila. Why won't you find the shaila? Because the censors removed it. It goes from Kuf Tzadi Daled to Kuf Tzadi Vav, and it skips Kuf Tzadi Hey because the censors eliminated it. However, here's a copy of the original. Bekama Yaros Nogan Yehudin L'Shloach Deronos L'Chomrim L'Sholtonim B'Yom Shmini L'Nittel Keshem Mesadrin Lahem Hashana Yesh Chashash Zirus B'Davra Olav. He says in many cities, Jews will send gifts, holiday gifts, to priests, to leaders, to politicians, to their mailman, to their newspaper man, to the garbage man. B'Yom Shmini L'Nittel, on the 8th day after Nittel. What is the 8th day after Nittel? The 8th day after Nittel was historically, ostensibly, Jesus' bris milah. He was a Jew. He had a bris on the 8th day. If he was born on the 25th, 8 days later, which is supposedly celebrated as the New Year, which calculates from not his birth, but his bris. So Rabbi Yisrael Israel in the Trumas Hadeshin is referencing 8 days after what? Nittel. 8 days after Nittel. And the question was, is it appropriate? Because we know we have a Mishnah of Avodah Zarah. The Mishnah of Avodah Zarah says 3 days before a idolatrous holiday, you're not allowed to give a gift, receive a gift. You shouldn't pay a debt to a non-Jew, an idolater. A whole list of things the Mishnah lists. Why? Because you can become an accomplice to idolatry. The idolater will go to their house of worship on their holiday and thank their God, their deity, for the business, the transaction, the debt that was paid by the Jew. So as not to be an accomplice, as not to be associated with their idolatry, the Mishnah says, for 3 days before you can't give a gift, pay a debt, transact. So the question was posed to the Trumas Hadeshin, does that rule of the Mishnah of Avodah Zarah apply to the 8th day after Nittel? Should one avoid giving gifts during this holiday season or on those specific days so as not to be associated or accomplices as if one is in observance of those days, which are not only foreign, but are forbidden to us? And the Trumas Hadeshin answers, don't give on that day. Leave a little something in your mailbox for the mailman, catch the garbage man, give to your non-Jewish friend the holiday gift. Don't give it on December 25th. Don't give it on January 1st. Give it on other days. And the Trumas Hadeshin goes on, not our subject, this halachic question, but the reference he has to the 8th day after Nittel. You see the Trumas Hadeshin uses and references the word Nittel. So does the Smag, the Sefer Mitzvos Gedolos. So does the Hagos Maimonos, as I told you. Where does the word or the term Nittel come from? So there are a few possibilities of where the term Nittel might come from. Mark Shapiro, again, as I referenced, has a very thorough article on this topic, and he brings down some of these ideas and some of these names. It could come from the medieval Latin, which I'm going to now mispronounce. I only know modern Latin, not medieval Latin. I'm just joking. I don't know any Latin. Medieval Latin, Natal Dominus, Noel, what the carols refer to as Noel, is similar or overlaps with Nittel, but much more likely the Aguda quotes. It could come from the word Nittel, comes from the word Hatalui or Nitle with a suf, which means the hanged one, the one who was hanged. It's Nittel Nacht. It's the night corresponding with the birth of the one who was hanged. Or the word Nittel with a tes can mean the word take away, to be taken away. Where did the custom of not studying Torah on that night? So I call your attention to the Sefer Minig Yisrael Torah. And here in Minig Yisrael Torah, he quotes several of the suggestions. V'davar haminig she'en lomdim b'leil Nittel, hine Hashem Nittel or Nittel kvar muskar b'rishonim, Trumas Hadeshin, Sefer Minhagim, as we referenced, she'noga b'leil Nittel lomar aleinu b'koram, af she'en nogin kikol shanam b'nei asakana. That the custom in some communities was to say Aleinu out loud on Nittel Nacht, even though we don't sing Aleinu the rest of the year, but to sing Aleinu. Aleinu is our antidote. Aleinu is our answer. Shehem mishtachadin lehevav arik. Also edited out at a time from Aleinu, because when we talk about hevav arik, who are we talking about? And therefore, they worship falseness. They worship nothingness. And we specifically say Aleinu on Nittel Nacht, the night that they're celebrating, a birth. My throat is just dry, nothing more than that. You have to explain these days if you cough or sneeze, you have to give a whole doctor's note and dissertation. My throat is just dry. So on the night of Nittel, which they're celebrating the birth of their God, we specifically sing our Aleinu out loud, which our Aleinu is the tribute that affirms that we do not believe in such things. So now one reason why is Bnei Yissaschar. The Heilig of Bnei Yissaschar, the great Rebbe says, that night Jesus was killed and he has some kind of mystical negative energy around him. And therefore, on that night, and that's the Nittel, he was removed. Something about the negative energy around this individual who spawned an entire religion, a religion that was historically incredibly hostile to our own, and he was killed on this night. However, Amnam Harbe Tamu, Amashakasav Shalom Nittel Nara Goso Ish, Tare Lefiadu, and Olado Sish Balailazu. So I'm at the underline here now at the top of the page. He says many rejected this suggestion of the Bnei Yissaschar because historically it's not true. December 25th doesn't correspond with Jesus' death, it corresponds with his birth. And therefore to suggest that we don't learn that night, because that's the night he left this world and he died and some energy will have a negative impact, historically makes no sense. And others say, no, the Bnei Yissaschar knew that too. He didn't mean that he was died that night, he meant he was born that night, but it was a euphemism. He didn't want to spell it out. Another reason brought down is the one that we read earlier, namely that if Jews were to be found outdoors, how many pogroms were perpetrated on Christmas Eve? Because in a crusade against the Jews who killed the God's birthday we're celebrating, if one encountered a Jew, it was a mitzvah to murder, minimally to beat, and therefore Jews were told, stay home. Chassam Sofer doesn't like this reason. And he says, I never heard that as an adequate reason or a description of why that would make sense. So the Chassam Sofer gives his own suggestion. He doesn't like that. He doesn't like the historical one. Maybe because he doesn't think it's accurate, but also because, again, why couldn't a Jew learn at home? Could learn at home. It's not a reason for no learning that night, for tonight. It would just be a reason for not going out. It's dangerous. It's too dangerous to go out that night. So he gives his own suggestion. And he says that what's going to happen? Jews are going to go to night Seder for 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night. You're going to have shiurim. You're going to have late marav. You're going to have chavrusas. You're going to come home and you're going to be asleep at 12 o'clock at night, just when the Christians are going to their midnight mass. And then what's it going to look like? Christians care more about God than Jews. Jews are fast asleep in their bed, while the Christians are just going to their temple, to their church. How will it look on the Jews? It's going to be mekatreg. It's going to be an indictment against the Jews who are schluffing away. Even those who are masmidim, most are asleep by midnight. So we don't want to establish that we would also wake up and go to the base medrash at midnight just while they're going to church. So therefore, it's not that we said Torah learning is forbidden on Nittel Nacht. What we said, this is the suggestion of the Chassam Sofer, of Moshe Sofer of Pressburg. But the Chassam Sofer suggestion is not that there's a prohibition of learning Torah, but rather there's a reorganization and restructuring of our learning Torah. Don't learn in your normal hours. Go to sleep early. It's like a Shavuos. Go to sleep, the reverse of Shavuos. Go to sleep at 8 o'clock to 12 o'clock, and then get up at 12 o'clock. Learn from 1 to 3, 1 to 4. Learn well past midnight mass is over. And therefore, no one can be mekatrig. There will be no indictment against the Jews that were lazy or less religious, less religiously vigilant than our co-religionists. Kippah machas, that's another reason. But he doesn't like this either. He quotes Bal Chidushei Arim, Belal Nittel, Pamacha Shal Kumar Echad, Esagon, Rash Bahag, Harebbe, Rabbi Yonasan Eibshitz. Once a non-Jewish religious leader asked Rabbi Yonasan Eibshitz, Halol lachem Yehudim yesh eish she'einechem lomdim Torah. B'chachamim kasu ki olam omed al Torah. I don't understand. The rabbi said the whole world rests on Torah. Ashlosh dvarim ha'olam omed. There are 3 pillars upon which the world rests, and one of them is Torah. And you say Talmud Torah keneged kulam. Torah is equal and opposite everything. How could it be? In Cain, how could it be? Amma olam omed b'shas halalu. In those hours of Nittel Nacht, if you're refraining from learning Torah, how is the world spinning on its axis? How is the world sustaining itself? The Heshiv La'agon, Rabbi Yonasan Eibshitz, Kiminag Yisrael Torah, V'davar Zeh Ba'atzmo, Shein Lomdim Az, Hu Torah, V'ayidei Zeh Yeshkim La'olam Adkan. So Rabbi Yonasan Eibshitz gave a very creative answer. He said, Minhag of the Jewish people is Torah. Observing this mitzvah is a fulfillment of Torah. And therefore, that Torah of not learning Torah is the Torah which protects us on the night, the eve of the 25th, and the eve of Nittel. Now, when exactly it should fall out, Masay Chalel Nittel, Yesh Bezem Minhagim Shonim, Ashkenazim, we are Ein Lomdim Belel Chagam Shal Anotzim. We don't learn on the 25th of December. Chasidim Ein Lomdim Belel Chagam Shal Yevanim. Depends on, again, which are Catholic or Prabaslovin, Shukiyam, the 4th of January. And others have different dates depending on which particular sect and which the timing that is. The Babich Rebbe in Sicha 5750 had a different explanation. And the Rebbe writes, this is the translation. Based on the above, we can understand the practices followed by the Rebbe in connection with Nittel. The previous Rebbe taught the Friedricher Rebbe that it's customary not to study Torah on that night in order not to increase divine life energy present. The previous Rebbe continued that his father, the Rebbe Rashab, because they weren't learning Torah, so how do you spend the Torah? How do you spend the night in a meaningful activity? He would play chess or give advice to others to play chess. He was sharpening his mind. He was utilizing his mind, but not in a way of learning Torah. The lesson that can be learned is as follows, said the Rebbe. When a Jew is in a situation which, because its level is very low, he cannot elevate in a direct manner through studying Torah, he should use the situation to produce a benefit in an indirect manner by playing chess, a game which is connected with the intellect. Firstly, it sharpens one's intellect. Secondly, playing successfully can increase the respect with which one is held by Gentiles. And thirdly, at times it can produce a direct financial benefit. Similarly, each person in his own way must use Nittel in a positive way. Rather than merely do nothing, he should perform acts connected with wisdom, or connected with charity and kindness, or connected with the proper functioning of his home. In this vein, the story was once told of a yeshiva student who wore a jacket which was missing a button. When he was asked why he didn't fix it, he replied, Nittel was approaching, he'd put off fixing it until then. The yeshiva student couldn't conceive of time that would be spent without any positive input. Knowing that he could not study on Nittel, he planned to use the time for another constructive act. So famously, Rebbes would play chess, or alternatively, before tissues, they would tear toilet paper for Shabbos. All the toilet paper for the entire year, they would tear on Nittel Nacht into pieces that were permissible to use and would not pose a problem. The Minchas Haluzer, the Munkacher Rebbe, would not take Kvittelach on Nittel Nacht. Not only was there a prohibition against the study of Torah, but again, because of this negative mystical energy that was hanging in the air, or what we call a little bit differently, the notion of not giving chiyas, not to give a sense of chiyas to this fraudulent and fake and inaccurate and distorted, not to give a life force to this energy that's out there in the world, so they wouldn't study Torah, and the Munkatcher Rebbe and others wouldn't take Kvittelach, and some of the custom not to have tashmish, that a husband and wife should not be intimate that night, unless it's mikvah night. If it's mikvah night, it would be permissible. But others have different opinions. This is Rav Moshe Sternbach. This practice did not take root in Lithuanian yeshivas. Among the Litvish, this custom of not studying Nittel Nacht doesn't apply. Chazon Ish said in Eretz Yisrael it doesn't apply. Jews can roam the streets freely on the eve of December 25th without risk, at least then, without risks from Christians. But therefore, the Chazon Ish said it didn't apply in Eretz Yisrael. This is the tshuva of Rav Moshe Sternbach. Rav Moshe Sternbach, Chuvas van Hagos, was a Rav in South Africa, Johannesburg, and now the Badatz in Eretz Yisrael. Anshe Lita kan lo shomer shas lemod leil nittel, aval davar mekubal etzel Hasidim. Hasidim don't, the Litvish should do. Rak nechliku b'zeh minhagim. Yishnogim below Nittel or less. Chamish December, Yishnogim b'sheish leJanuar. Some not on the 4th, some on the 5th, some the eve of the 25th. V'tam elu anogim kan kain she'az misasvan yachad l'tumah. And the reason, I don't know what just happened. Somebody just shared their screen. I lost my screen. Hold on. Hold on. Where did my screen go? Here it is. Okay, we're back. You see it? Somebody give me a thumbs up. Thank you very much. Well done. So the Chuvas van Hagas or Moshe Sternbach says, Tam elu anogim kain she'az misasvan yachad l'tumah, because there are gatherings all over the world on the eve of December 25th for tumah that are introducing impurity, spiritual poison, contamination into the world. So what happens is that if you go out, like climate change, or that's a bad example, pollution, or I have a good example, a virus, corona, COVID. If somebody has a virus that's out in the air, you can have an invisible virus that is out in the air, even if you're completely healthy. But if you're exposed to that invisible virus, then that invisible virus can attach itself to you. So you might be going out to daven, to learn, to do chesed. You're going out to do things, actions of kedusha, of sanctity. But if there's an invisible, lethal virus, you can nevertheless, it can be transmitted to you. And the same is true when it comes to mystical. What's true about viruses physically are true with viruses spiritually. And idolatry and tumah, impurity, are spiritual viruses. And if you go out and you are active on a night where there is a proliferation of contamination of virus in the universe, then you can have it transmitted, you can contract that virus. However, the practice now in England and America, you don't have midnight mass the way once did. So Rav Sternbach says, today, there's not a whole lot of midnight mass going on. It's not a mass movement to mass. And therefore, the risk either physically of a pogrom or the risk spiritually of contracting the spiritual virus of idolatry is no longer present. Here in South Africa, he wrote this at the time he was still in South Africa. Here in South Africa, there is no custom not to learn, so certainly they should learn. But those who want to be strict, sew a button, tear your toilet paper, play chess. As I referenced, some say that one should not be intimate, married couples should not be intimate that night, even if it's mikvah night. And those who want to be lenient, if it's mikvah night, should only do so after midnight, and so on. Good. So that is those issues. There's another custom on Nittel Nacht, lecho shum belel afela. Some of the customs is quoted by the Chuvas Siach Yitzchak, a custom specifically to chew on garlic on Nittel Nacht. On the eve of December 25th, on the eve of Christmas, for those who say you're allowed to say the word, there's a custom to chew on garlic. Why? It's a very interesting also. This is brought down in some of the articles on the subject. The reason to chew garlic is a continuation of the last halacha. We just said that because of these negative energies, these unhealthy, these impure energies that are in the world around that night and that are being spread because of such inauthentic religions practicing so broadly that night, so you're not supposed to be intimate, what's the best way to make sure to avoid intimacy? Chew garlic. If you chew garlic, it'll give you a bad breath, and that will push others away, and that will promote the observance of that other custom, and that's where this custom originated from. However, others reject that not being the reason. And they say, where does this come from? Every other night of the year, we are found learning Torah, doing mitzvahs. But this night, if you're not going to learn Torah and do mitzvahs, then how will you be protected? Torah and mitzvahs are what protect us. So we have a custom. We do see already in the Gemara a reference that if you eat garlic, it is able to fend off the negative spirits. So since garlic has a tradition of fending off negative spirits, and this is a night that we can't rely on the learning of Torah to fend off those negative spirits, therefore there was a custom that developed and evolved to chew garlic that night of Nittel Nacht. I omitted there was another opinion of the Chassam Sofer quoted from his Rabbi, Rav Nosson Adler, who had a tradition that the reason that we don't learn Torah on Nittel Nacht is because we're all in mourning. Why are we all in mourning? Because throughout the last 2 millennia, how many Jews were brutally murdered in the name of Christianity, in the name of Jesus? So on the night that they're celebrating his birth, we are all mourning the countless loss that our people suffered in his name. And therefore, just as the mourner is forbidden to study Torah, so too we don't study Torah. Chassam Sofer quotes that from his Rebbe, but ultimately rejects that. He doesn't like that. He doesn't like that reason. He doesn't like that suggestion, which is offered. So that is a little bit about Nittel Nacht. What is our custom? What is our minhag? Well, it's hard to say. When you say what is our minhag, it depends who the R is. If you're Hasidim, if Kabbalistically, there's whole other reasons as well. Some suggest based on Kabbalah and mysticism, to not give a chiyas, to not energize these negative forces. The Sitra Achra is strong. The Sitra Achra, the dark forces of the other side are strong. The force is strong and it's out there, and therefore we shouldn't be out there or subjecting ourselves to its influence. So what's the proper practice? You have to ask your local Orthodox rabbi. My practice is to study Torah. I think we're in good company with a lot of Litvisha and even others who say that whether historically the reason no longer applies or even mystically the reason is not as strong, there aren't that many going to midnight mass. But my Rebbeim and my tradition is to study Torah tonight, but each his own. And with that, wishing everyone stay healthy, and stay happy, stay holy, stay safe. I look forward to a time that we can be together in person again, studying very, very soon. Have a wonderful Shabbos, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Shkoach, thank you very much.
Rabbi Goldberg.
Thank you, Rabbi Goldberg.
Good Shabbos, Rabbi Goldberg.
My pleasure. Take care, everyone. Have a great Shabbos.
It's me,
Shabbos,
Jeffrey.
Shabbos,
You know me.
Shabbos.
Thank you, Rabbi Goldberg. Good Shabbos.